You're listening to Parenting Our Future. I'm parenting expert Robbin McManne, author of The Yelling Cure and founder of Parenting for Connection. My podcast is all about providing you with the tools and solutions you need in all different areas of your parenting so you can create strong connections with your kids, get all the cooperation you want, and live a life that is full of joy and connection. And by the way, the tools and solutions that you're looking for in your parenting don't just live in each episode of my show, they're also in my free membership site, The Parent Toolbox, where you can access tools created by myself and my brilliant guests that cover everything from helping your kids to sleep, managing meltdowns, reducing overwhelm, to getting your kids to listen the first time, and so much more. Join the Parent Toolbox so you can download and use the tools that are ready on the site, and each week, a brand new tool is added. And of course, the best part is it's absolutely free to join and to stay in. You can go to www.parent-toolbox.com today. Now let's dive into this next episode of Parenting Our Future. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Parenting Our Future. It's Robbin McManne here, and I have the most wonderful guest. He's actually been on the show before. I'm talking to Gary Quesenberry. And so we're talking about teens in this episode. We're talking about how to keep our teens safe, which I know is top of mind for every parent that has teenagers. And Gary has the most amazing background that I want to share it with you so you know he is the real deal. So Gary enlisted in the United States Army at the age of 17. And that's where he served as an artilleryman during Operation Desert Storm. And after the events of 9/11, Gary went to work as a federal air marshal, where he traveled the world in his country's service and devoted his time to studying fields of violence and predatory behavior. Gary now serves as the CEO of Quesenberry Personal Defense Training and is the author of Heads Up, Situational Awareness series, Spotting Danger Before It Spots You, Spotting Danger Before It Spots Your Kids, and now his new book, Spotting Danger Before It Spots Your Teens. He's also been featured on History Channel's hit television series Top Shot and Top Shot All-Stars. Gary has an extensive background in domestic and foreign counterterror training and has worked in both private and corporate sectors to educate others on the importance of situational awareness and personal safety. Gary, thank you so much for coming back. Thank you so much. So happy to have you here.
It's my pleasure. I love talking to you, so it's always good to come back on.
See that accent? Love that accent. All right, so I am going to hold up your books here. So I have Spotting Danger Before It Spots You, and then Spotting Danger Before It Spots Your Kids. And so what I love about what you're doing and what you've done with your books is they really build upon each other. And so obviously the kids one is for, under those teen years, because it requires a different language. It requires a different level of alertness with those kids. But teens, now we're talking about teens that are away from us, are doing things where they have to make critical decisions. And, as they get older, the stakes get higher. So I love that about what you're doing. And I want to ask you, what you really anchor in with all of these books is you anchor into the situational awareness. Right. And I would love to sort of start there as a bit of a review, because there are a few different pillars of situational awareness that you talk about. So can we sort of start there and dive in there?
Sure. Well, like you said, the books, one kind of builds upon the other. The first book in the series, Spotting Danger Before It Spots You, that's the nuts and bolts book on situational awareness. I wrote it in layman's terms. I tried to stay away from all the technical jargon that we use in the military and law enforcement, because I wanted this to be something that everyone could pick up and understand. Not only understand it, but to be able to take some of the tips and techniques that I give in the book and the practical exercises that I outline and put those in place the next time you walk out the door. So you can instantly see some benefit from the things that you learn in that book. The second book in the series, like you mentioned, that's situational awareness for younger children, say between the ages of 4 and 12. Now, it's not a children's book. Mm-hmm. It's for parents with younger children, and it teaches them how to kind of start that conversation with their children, not necessarily set your 4-year-old down and say, we're going to talk about situational awareness. That's never going to happen. But, there's these little games and little things that you can do with younger children to help them build, their descriptive vocabulary, help them get more engaged with their environment so that they understand baseline behaviors and how to spot things that fall outside that baseline, and then report that back to their parents in an intelligent way that we can understand, and then we can help them through it. Mm-hmm. Now, once they get to 12 years old, they start getting into their teens, that's when things start changing. And that's what this third book is about. So you don't necessarily have to read one book to understand the other, because I do a little bit of a refresher, in each one for the parent. But, it's a good idea. And each one's packed. I kept them, purposely kind of, around 180 pages or so that they weren't an overwhelming read. And I like to think that they're kind of easy to read and follow. So you can, ingest that in chunks and walk away with something that's going to keep you and your family safe.
I remember one thing. Well, I remember many things from our conversation before, which you were on episode 99, which literally is called Spotting Danger Before It Spots Your Kids. But the thing that stays with me is, we always teach our kids to look for somebody in a uniform, or look for, people who, obviously you can trust. But you said, yes, okay, but look for another mom. Chances are that mom is going to do whatever she can to help you as a little kid, right?
Her own children. Yeah. Short of endangering her own children, a mother will go out of their way to help a child in need. And that's always been my experience, and it's something I write about in the book, where my son actually had to depend on another mother when we got separated at a 5K race to help reconnect us. Yeah. And luckily he had the skills and tools that he needed to identify the proper person and get the help he needed. Because if you just teach, your children, if you use fear as a tactic, which I hate, but, if you just teach your children that all strangers are dangerous, then they're never going to be able to approach somebody when they need help, or identify the people that they should approach. So it's, it's important that they understand that not all strangers are bad. Yeah. And they need to know what little characteristics and things to look for to indicate that someone could be there to help them, as opposed to someone that they should just shy away from and, maybe not even get help at all for themselves.
That's right. Yeah. The danger is they don't get any help. And that's scary. So I that to me was such an important lesson, that stranger danger doesn't really work, and it's flawed, and that, and this is what you can do instead. So thank you for that. That is a lesson that is just timeless. I love it. And so situational awareness, you break it down into how people should act, read the environment, identify problems, know your options, reinforcement through visualization. So can you give us, for the listeners, can you give us just sort of a broad idea of what situal awareness, struggling with that word today, actually means? Like, what is it to you?
Okay. Well, a lot of people have this misconception of what situational awareness is. So they think that it's something that's reserved for like spies or something like that, and it's not. The, situational awareness isn't something that's out of a Jason Bourne movie. It's something that we all implement in our lives every day when we're driving down the street, or we're looking for a parking spot, at the grocery store. What you need to learn about situational awareness is the fact that it's not reserved for those types of people. And situational awareness is simply a matter of taking in environmental cues for the purposes of predicting the actions of others. That's how I identify situational awareness. So, you've got to do a couple of things to get yourself to that point. One is you have to learn to think like a predator. And that's not always easy for people. You have to kind of put yourself in that predator's mindset, so you know how they target people and who they target specifically and why. Once you learn that, you have a better understanding of your own personal flaws that you can correct and make yourself appear to be more of a hard target and less likely to be approached by someone with ill intentions. And then you can pass that information on to your children. Once you have that down pat, then you're starting to look at what we call pre-incident indicators. So you learn what baseline behaviors are. Baseline behaviors are just any normal behavior in a given circumstance, and it can apply to a place or a person. So, you're a parent, so you know what the baseline behavior is in your house, and you've got children. So when you come home, sometimes those children may be a little bit rambunctious and bouncing off the walls, and they just got home from school and everything's a little bit chaotic. That's a baseline behavior. That's perfectly normal. But if you ever came home and all of a sudden your children are super quiet and they're not in the room, and you're like, okay, something's wrong. Who broke what, kind of thing. So that's just you reading the baseline at home. But you can do that when you're out in grocery stores, or you're at the park, or you're in a concert, or at the beach with your family. You can read those baselines. And once you identify something that rises above that baseline and draws your attention, then you know that that's what you need to be focused on. And then you start making decisions based on that information. Is this something that could pose a danger to me and my family? And then you start looking at your options. Can I escape or can I avoid it? That's the number one option, is try to just get around it and not be involved in it in the first place. Then there's escape, de-escalation, and communication. And I break all those things down in the book for the sole purpose of, at the end of the day, you walk away, you or your family, you and your family, safe and sound, and you make it home without ever being involved in those dangerous situations that could present themselves at any time.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I remember and really took away is, you talk about baseline. And so when you see something that is out of alignment with what should be happening, and I used an example last time where we were at this fair or festival, and I saw this little kid, this little boy crying, and then I looked at my sister-in-law, and she looked at me, and she's like, yeah, go. Because I was like, we telepathically had a conversation about, do you think he's in trouble? Should I go? Should I help him? And she's like, yeah, go. And so I went over to him, and then, you articulated this in a way I couldn't. You said yes. And then what I did was I found the match to that situation, which was parents who were looking pretty freaked out themselves. And then we knew that was how to reunite them. So, yeah, I just thought I'd share that again.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And that's what it's all about right there, is just being in tune with your environment. And what a lot of people do is they let themselves get so focus locked on either internally on things that are distracting them in their personal lives, or externally with things, like their cell phone. Yeah. And there's so many things that you'd be amazed what's going on around you that you miss just because you get that focus lock. But if you can just, put all that aside for a little while and focus solely on that baseline behavior in your environment, learn what that means and what that feels like, you'll be amazed at what you pick up on in other people. And that's what, keeping yourself safe is really all about, is being able to spot those little danger signals that present themselves from time to time, and learning how to work around them.
Yeah. Which brings me to the heads up, that the first thing that you've ever done is called Heads Up, which I think just is such a great title, because you got to get your head up and get your head out of.
Well, it's the series overall that I call the Heads Up series.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Because anytime I teach a class or I present this material in person, people ask me without fail, what's the one thing that I can do right now to help keep myself safe? And the answer is simple, just get your head up and pay attention to what's going on around you. Because when you do that, one, you're changing your posture, you're changing the way other people perceive you, you're looking more confident and in tune with your environment. And at the end of the day, predators are more concerned with their own personal safety, right? They don't want to get hurt, they don't want to get caught. So if you just through your, your posture and your actions, look like the type of person that would raise an alarm or draw attention to what they're doing, they will go out of their way to avoid you. And that's what you want. So, get your head up and pay attention to what's happening. You'd be amazed at what you can pick up on. Now, situational awareness, not to oversimplify it, it's a whole lot more than that.
Yeah.
That's one thing you can do right now to really help the way you look to other people.
Yeah. Yeah. Really important. And like you said, you don't want to be a soft target. You want to be a hard target. You don't want to make it easy for someone to think, oh yeah, she's right for the picking, right? That's not good. So let's talk about teens, because they need to learn this. And I want to clarify, is the book that you've written, Spotting Danger Before It Spots Your Teen, is it a book for parents to read and or a book for teens to read?
It's a little bit of both, right?
Yeah.
So it's mostly for parents, just like the other books, because at the end of the day, you're the one solely responsible for your children's safety. Now, the teen years get a little more complicated because now they're starting to explore their own individuality. So where you were able to keep your kids close and in the confines of, that little bubble that you created around them for a certain period of time, they're going to start wanting to break away from that.
Yeah.
And when they do, they're going to start, wanting to drive. They're going to want to date and go to parties and dances and all these things, right? You understand.
I'm right there with you.
And you want your children, just like you want them to be outgoing and friendly with people and understand what real safety looks like. You also want them to get out and discover who they are. And they can't do that without those life experiences. And you want them to have that. But at the same time, you also want them to have the knowledge and tools that they need to keep themselves safe in those situations that they could put themselves in. Yeah. You and I were talking earlier, when teenagers, say a teenager's at a party and it's perfectly innocent, things have a tendency with teenagers to escalate. And at some point, your teenager may find themselves in a situation that they didn't necessarily want to be in. And they're going to need to escape from that. So that's why the communication piece with parents and teens is so important. And understanding that no matter how we feel about each other or what our thoughts and beliefs are about things, whatever that may be, at the end of the day, the safety piece is what we all have in common. You don't want to go out and get yourself hurt. We as parents don't want to see you go out and get hurt. So use that, as that kind of hub for this whole conversation that you need to have with your teenagers.
Right. And as parents, our job isn't done when our kids are teenagers. They do not have a fully grown brain yet, which means they can't always have critical thinking. They can't forecast consequences. That's why things can go sideways, right? Because they're not mature enough yet. So right. We still need to be the safe place for them to come to no matter what. And yes, they may be drinking. Yes, they may be doing drugs or other things that you don't want them to do. But when they call for help, you go and help and leave that situation until, like you say, cooler heads prevail, right?
Yeah, there's a conversation to be had there, and it will be had. But you have to kind of set the groundwork. And what I outlined in the book from the perspective of, I was a firearms instructor for the Federal Air Marshal Service for 3 years. Okay. And we worked with students who some had some experience with firearms and worked in law enforcement before, or were in the military, and some were just out of college and never touched a gun before in their life. So our job as instructors was to just keep everybody on the same sheet of music and keep everybody safe, right? And I relate that to being a parent. That's our job. Keep everybody on the same sheet of music, keep everybody safe.
That's right.
So in the Air Marshal Service, we use what we call the 4 cardinal firearms rules, right? To keep everybody safe. Everybody had to know those rules. And you also had to know what we call the left and right limits. You're not allowed to shoot past this point to the right or past this point to the left. So in my book, I kind of put it in that context. Like that. As parents, we need to set our kids down and say, listen, these are the rules. We want you to explore your individuality, and we want you to figure out who you are. We want you to have friends and get the independence that you feel like you need. But at the same time, if these rules get broken and it jeopardizes your safety, or you step outside those limits that we set, then we as parents are going to reassert that authority and take over again. So it's a little bit of give and take, and it's not always easy. And it's almost never easy, as a matter as you know. But it can be done, and you can get through it on the other end with independent, safety-minded teens. And safety-minded teens seems like an oxymoron, but they are out there.
It's a joke.
But you can do it, and it takes a whole lot of work on both ends. And as long as you sit down and you communicate that with each other and hold each other accountable and responsible for your own actions, then it's there.
Yeah. And so what I hear you saying is, I love the analogy that you use, this is your boundary for left and right, when you're talking about shooting, and our kids need boundaries. They need this scaffolding of support around them where they can feel free to push up against them, but then they're held back by us. because that is our job, A, and B, I think they secretly like it because it does make them feel safe. And then they can always use that. Hey, blame me all you want in front of your friends. Sounds good. As long as I'm
I'll be your
keeping you safe.
scapegoat.
Yeah, totally. No problem.
I'm good with that.
Talk about me however you want to. It doesn't matter to me. I stand by what I'm doing. And so what I want to just mention, because we're not going to talk about these in any detail here, because I'm going to pepper you with questions for a different section, but you have phase 1, 2, and 3. And in phase 3, you talk about responsibility, accountability, communication, and teamwork. So I want to say that because you do talk about how to talk about it. And, or I should say you write about how to talk about it, which I think is also really, really important. So you're giving parents the tools that they need to really navigate this in a really fulsome way. So thank you for that.
Oh, yeah, it's my pleasure. Yeah, the responsibility and accountability piece are those are big pieces of the puzzle. So you want to make sure that you each understand what your responsibilities are, their responsibilities as teens, your responsibilities as a parent, and you have to communicate that to each other. And you can't just keep changing the rules, because you feel like it, or because and if you've got multiple kids, they're all individuals, and what works well for one may not work for another. So that's where the accountability piece comes in. If one's doing everything right and they're getting extra privileges, and the other one does something wrong, and you got to kind of reel them in a little bit, they have to understand that they're the ones accountable for their actions, not their siblings. So, and just the communication piece. I feel like a lot of things get lost, when it comes to communication. And I will be the first one to admit that I was never good with that. I was always the hot-headed one, and I was always kind of like the hammer in the family, so when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So problems would pop up, dad's there to squash them. And I make the confession in this book that a lot of the decisions I made as a parent, or a lot of the things that I write about in this book, I have the benefit of hindsight. And my wife, Kelly, she did a lot of the heavy lifting, with the teens, because I was flying all over the place, doing my job. And if I got called in on a situation, then, somebody exceeded those left and right limits, and it was time to kind of drop that hammer. But, we learned a lot together. And I think, when it's all said and done, we've got 3 beautiful children. My youngest is now 23 years old. She just got married. All 3 of my kids are in the military and doing well. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's, I think what we did worked. And, I think that parents can benefit from that. And it all kind of revolves around that situational awareness piece. And when you think about situational awareness with your teens, it's more about just being able to read the environment and find, dangerous situations and figure out how to get around them. You also have to understand what your teenager's baseline is. And when something falls outside of that baseline, you have to understand that, there's a communication gap there, and you need to close that gap so that you can better relate to them and figure out what it is that's bothering them and how that affects the family in general, and help them get through those things. So, situational awareness isn't just about, the self-defense piece. It's about, family communication and bonding. And I think that that's something that really comes through in this 3rd book.
Yeah, really, really good point. You're so right. You're so right. It's like your side hustle could be parent coaching, because everything you say is completely aligned with what I talk about. I really love that. And obviously that's why you're here, because I think you're amazing. So let's talk about understanding the risks that teens face, because sure, you can have situational awareness, but as we know, there are things that are stacked up against us. For example, with social media. And so, we know now, although we suspected, I think, that algorithms work against us. They promote hate, and like promotes like, which can be really hard on your child, on your teenager. So you say understanding the risks that teens face. You cover off 3 main subjects here, which is online safety, school violence, and exploitation. Can we touch on each of those on a really high level?
Yeah. So okay, online safety. I'll be the first to admit that that's something that every parent, I believe, unless you're working in the tech environment, kind of struggles with because it moves
100%.
so fast. It's kind of hard for us to keep up with. You and I are doing this little conversation right here, and my Alexa or whatever it is keeps chiming in the background.
Yeah, we can barely hear it. Don't worry.
I don't know what I'm saying, but it keeps triggering her for some reason. So anyway, I struggle with that technology piece, but teen girls specifically are the most targeted segment of the population when it comes to predatory violence. And that's something that parents really have to be aware of. So we may not always understand what our children are doing online, but we can keep a close eye on that and monitor those things. And we can talk to other parents and, the things like you do to keep parents informed of what, is going on, in the world with just parenting in general. It's so important because we always have to stay in tune to that. It's really easy for us when it comes to online safety to say, well, I don't understand it. They get it. They're smart. I'm sure it's fine. That's not always the best answer. So I tell a couple of stories in the book, and it's about the hard lessons that we had to learn with like simple things like video games. Like I remember when video games were just something that you plug in and you play and that was it. But now, there's this whole online community and kids are playing with other kids from different parts of the world. And there's a lot of predatory behavior that happens within that world. And it's something that has to be kept an eye on. So always make it a point to educate yourself as a parent as to what's happening in that technological realm within your kid's life, because it becomes incredibly important to their safety. The second piece is school violence. It's something we don't always like to talk about. It can be anything, which we all had to deal with when, we were kids, is the bullying aspect of school. And then you've got things like school trips, team sports and things like that, where kids can be bullied or exploited at school. And then, all the way up to a school shooting. So what I recommend for parents is for them to sit down with their, the counselors at school or, some sort of a figurehead at the school and talk about how they handle those situations, everything from bullies to active shooters within the school, and familiarize yourself with that plan and understand how you're going to be able to communicate with your kids. If something were to happen at the school, how are you reunited with your child? How are you going to be notified when something's happening? And what is your role in that whole thing? So, we can do a lot more than we typically do in order to keep ourselves well informed of what's happening in our children's school.
Great suggestion. I feel terrible that I never did that.
And the other thing too is most of the time at the beginning of the school year, like kids will come home with all these papers and books and everything, and they ignore 98% of it.
100%.
But if you go through that 9 times out of 10, there's going to be a pamphlet in there that's given to them by the school that outlines like the school's emergency contacts, all the emergency procedures. It's all in there. And if you can't find it, then make it a point to reach out to someone at the school and make sure that you as a parent have that information.
Great idea.
And then, when it comes to exploitation, that's something where, teens specifically get targeted online in school, no matter where they turn. They're exploited by adults with predatory intentions. And what they do is they focus in on what that teen is lacking, whether it's something physical, like money or nice clothes, or something emotional, like they don't feel like they're getting the attention that they need or the love that they need at home. And they'll exploit those, those little points in a child's life to get them to do things that they may necessarily not want to do. And just for the feeling of inclusion and this person really gets me and understands. So, that's a tool that predators use against teens. And it's something that we as parents have to keep our eye on.
I'll never forget this story. So in my former career, I did a lot of work in the community on behalf of my company. And I was sitting talking to a principal of an inner city school. And this was a true inner city, this particular area. There was a lot of poverty and there were a lot of immigrants and I'll never forget it. She said that they have pimps circling the playground looking for their next victim. And that is,
It's
shocking.
horrifying. As a parent, that's horrifying. And then you read things in the news, like it's been decades ago, I guess, where there was a prostitution ring being run inside the Mall of America, and these pimps had exploited these young teens, and they were compensating them with things like clothes and stuff that they would buy them from the mall. And
Oh my gosh.
these were kids without money, without, maybe without a father figure. They felt unloved. They didn't feel included or bullied, or they didn't feel pretty enough or whatever.
Yeah.
And that was exploited. And
Wow.
it's the most egregious crime that I feel could ever be committed. And it's got to be addressed. And now with everything going on in the world with human trafficking and stuff like that, it's something that we really have to keep an eye on.
Absolutely.
And if you think that that's something that only happens in foreign countries or in poor areas of the world, you've got another thing coming. This happens every day right under our noses. And, I write about it pretty extensively in the book. And a good friend of mine, Craig Sawyer, actually runs a company now. He was one of my supervisors. He's a former SEAL team guy. We work together in the Air Marshal Service, but, he runs vets for child safety, and they break up these sex trafficking rings and these people that are exploiting children. And a lot of the information that I get about how this works and what we as parents can do about it comes from organizations like that. So there's so many of them out there. I recommend that every parent get online and look for one of those organizations and get all the information that you can from them about what vulnerabilities your children have and how those are being exploited, because it changes all the time, just like technology. And it's really hard to stay up to date on it. But luckily for us, we can use the internet just as well as anybody else. And there's a lot of really good information out there to help educate ourselves on some of these issues that our teens face and what we can do about it to help keep them safe.
Yeah. Okay. And so what I'm going to do is we'll talk after, and I'll get a site or two from you, and I'll put them in the show notes so people know a good place to go to get good information, because I think that's the trouble, right? Is that, the internet is huge, and where do you go? And you fall into a black hole, and, and it's scary. And
not all the information out there is credible.
Right. Exactly. My point.
You got to make sure that you're getting your information from a credible source and somebody that knows what they're talking about. Exactly. They work in that field specifically, and it's not just something that they researched on the internet, like we do as parents.
Yeah.
Our job is to just keep our little tribe as safe as we can. Yeah. And the only way to do that is by branching out and kind of pulling knowledge from other places so that we can educate ourselves on some of these risks.
Exactly. Yeah. And, it's interesting. I went back to what you said earlier. You said that this ring that was in the Mall of America, buying them clothes and different things like that. Well, that is also off of baseline. If you see your kids coming in with clothes you didn't buy them, that they, they don't have money for, like, whoa, that's a huge red flag, right? So I just thought I'd take it back there, because that's what made me.
I put a lot of those in the books, like things that we need to be on the lookout for, behaviors in our own children that could indicate that maybe they're having a relationship outside the home that they shouldn't be having, or they're being exploited by someone else. And, once you learn what those little key indicators are, just like the pre-incident indicators I talk about in the first book, it really goes a long way in helping you keep tabs on what's happening in your child's life.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about kids that are teens, but they are 12 to 16. So they don't have driver's licenses yet. And the kinds of things that they're facing. So in the book, you talk about the following. You talk about being home alone, being at malls, movies, and parks, sleepovers, school trips, and team sports. So there's a couple here that I wouldn't mind. I don't want you to go through all of them, but, talk to me about home alone. What are some of the things that you advise?
Well, I think that's the first real step in that any parent goes through whenever their kids start wanting to be more independent, is they want to be left home alone. So, we were always okay with that. And, you got to put somebody in charge. You got to make sure they all know the rules. And then you don't just say, well, I'm going to go to a movie and be gone for the next 4 hours the first time this happens. It has to happen in stages. So if you got to run a quick errand, go fill your tank up with gas or something like that, then, you're gone for 20 minutes, maybe a half an hour, and you come back and the house is still intact, then okay, you did good. maybe we'll extend that a little bit next time. And, you kind of reward those good behaviors. And eventually it gets to the point where they can be left alone for extended periods of time. But that's kind of the first step. And you want to make sure that you don't take that step too early. You want to make sure that your child is ready for that level of responsibility, that they understand how to call 911, that they understand, okay, I know my neighbor and I know their phone number. So if something were to happen, they could come over and check on things, or if they were scared or they thought something was wrong, they could, call someone if you weren't close enough to respond yourself. So just these little things like that, you start developing that with your child when they're young. And then once they're ready for that independence, you feel a little more comfortable handing the reins over. And then, like we talked about earlier, one thing builds upon the next. So they're left at home for a little while, then they're left at home for a little bit longer. And then when they want to be left alone, like we talk about, movie theaters and malls and stuff like that, you feel comfortable dropping them off, right? Yeah. With established pickup times, established check-in times. If you're late, then this isn't going to happen anymore, kind of thing. So you set those boundaries, those rules, those left and right limits that we talked about earlier, and you just steadily feed your child a little bit more independence at a time, so that when they do become fully mobile and they have their driver's license, you're a lot more comfortable with the decisions that they may make when they're outside of your control.
So with each of these topics here, home alone, malls, movies, parks, sleepovers, is it really about communication between parent and child, or do you get into this is what could happen in a mall or a movie theater? Because we all know there have been incidents
right
there as well. So yeah, tell me about that.
Okay. So, I get into a little bit of both sides of that in the book. Mm-hmm. So, it's important that your teen understands some of the dangers they may face in situations like that. Mm-hmm. And if you read the second book, Spotting Danger Before It Spots Your Kids, that's one of the things that we do with our children, is we play these little what if games when we're out in public. So we're in a restaurant, we're at the mall, or we're at a movie theater. What if a fight broke out right here and the exits were blocked? How do we protect ourselves? What would you do to stay safe? And you get them to thinking about these things, and you start that at a younger age. So not every kid's going to progress at the same level. Right. I've met 18-year-olds that shouldn't be left at home for 30 minutes by themselves, and at the same time, I've met 12-year-olds who I'd be perfectly comfortable letting them watch my child for a couple of hours if I needed to, because they have that level of responsibility and maturity. So the younger you can start with your child on these little situational awareness games and these kind of what if scenarios, it helps them think critically about their environment. Yes. And, so that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is when they start, like we said, when we start giving them the reins a little more to control their own, their own schedule and their own independence, then we have to make sure that they have those little fallback points, so that we can come and bail them out if we need to. We understand that, okay, you're going to be gone for 2 hours. I expect a phone call every 30 minutes, or a text message or something to let me know that you're okay and you're where you're supposed to be. And then you establish a meeting point, and I will be here to pick you up at this time. And the one thing that we always taught our kids is, if you're early, you're on time, right? If you're on time, you're late. And if you're late, then you're grounded and you're never going out again. So, those are the rules. And they knew it, and they'll recite that to you now. Like, they hate to be late for anything, because I drilled that into them when they were children. So, so consistently. And, it worked for us, and hopefully it works for other parents. I understand not every child is the same, but I think that the stuff that I outline in the book works pretty universally in terms of situational awareness and personal safety, so that you're giving your teens the tools they need to exercise that when they're not, within eyesight of a parent.
So, okay. So I want to move on to older teens, but I want to ask you about sleepovers and what you cover about sleepovers, because that is an interesting topic to be included into the book, but one that I am maybe secretly, not so secretly, always worried about. I think, I don't know, I don't think I want my teenager doing a sleepover, because that's when they're going to sneak out. The influence of others is pretty powerful, but I'd like you to talk about it.
Well, the one rule that we always had is there's no sleepovers or anything like that in a house where we haven't personally met the parents.
Okay.
And I'm not talking about just, a
Yeah.
conversation on the phone. I want to know who this kid is, and I want to know
Mhm.
who their parents are and what they're like. So, and I want to make sure that I have that phone number and things like that. So I don't know when it changed, or if it was just the way I was brought up as opposed to the way we brought my children up.
Right.
But there were so many sleepovers, for my kids. They were planning sleepovers all the time. I would wake up some Sunday mornings. I always used to make pancakes, and I got to run out and buy more pancake mix, because
There's all these kids.
I've got 10 kids in the house. I don't know where they all came from.
Yeah.
So, my wife managed all that. But, when I was a kid, I remember having sleepovers maybe 2 or 3 times, and it was always a big deal. But when my kids were teenagers, it was something that was a little more common, and they all played sports, so that was a good opportunity for me and my wife to meet and interact with their friends and meet and interact with their friends' parents. So we established those relationships early on. And until we were comfortable with that child and that child's parents, there was no sleepover. That was the rule. We have to know and be comfortable with these people first. We have to have open lines of communication so that if something were to happen on my end or something were to happen on their end, that we could make contact and pull them out of that situation if they felt uncomfortable or something was going on there that they weren't necessarily, happy about, and they wanted to come home. And same thing with us. If something happened on our end, we wanted to be able to contact somebody right away so that we could, make contact with the child and pull them away and get them back home if we needed to.
Yeah, if you think about it, it's a huge responsibility to have other kids in your care, and also to let your kids be in somebody else's care, because something could happen, right? So it makes a lot of sense what you're saying. I really like the way you look at it.
One point I want to make too is that that communication piece is really so important, because one thing that we learned early on is the way we lived was much different than the way some of my children's parents lived. And I worked as a federal air marshal for 19 years. When my kids were teenagers, I was an active federal air marshal, and I was armed. Unless I was asleep, I was armed pretty much.
Right.
So we had guns in the house.
Right.
And I felt that it was important for parents to know that, even though my gun is completely locked away in a safe, and I make sure, I've been doing this for a long time, and it's not just something I leave laying around on tables or in drawers unattended. That's not how it works.
Right.
But some parents, just by the fact, of what I did for a living and the fact that I had a gun in the house, they were uncomfortable with their children coming over.
Yeah.
And we had that conversation a couple of times, and I was always very appreciative of it. Even if they said, "Hey, listen, we're not comfortable with our child coming over," I understand that 100%. I don't hold that against anybody. That's the way you're raising your children, and that's, perfectly okay. I understand where that concern comes from. But, without those conversations, if something were to happen later down the road where they found out I had a gun in the home, and they let their child stay and they weren't comfortable with that, and I didn't say anything, that would cause a bit of conflict between the parents, which would in turn, I believe, cause conflict between my child and their friends. And I would never want that. So the communication piece in all this is so important, whether it's communication between spouses, communication between, you and your teen's friends, the parents of your teen's friends. It's a network when your children become of age where they start seeking their independence. And the tighter you can keep that network, the safer you can keep your kids.
Yeah, that's true. And it's your duty to let people know if you have a firearm. Absolutely. I remember feeling uncomfortable with one of my son's friends whose stepdad is a hunter, and knowing there was multiple firearms in the home. And that's so unusual here in Canada, because, we just don't have that. So, so it's
where here, every family on, within 100-mile radius has a gun, because everybody's hunters. We live in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, everybody. And it's more unusual to find someone who doesn't have a gun in their home is to find someone with a gun. And that's different. It's a different dynamic, and it's not to say that one is right and one is wrong. It's just to say that they're different. But as long as you've got that communication piece in place, you can work those things out, whether it be, for good or bad. However your teen views it, you won't let me stay there because he's got a gun in the house. That's okay. that's just the way we feel about things. And, we can communicate that with each other, and it doesn't change the relationship that you have with your friends. It just means that you're not staying overnight.
Yeah.
And that falls back on those left and right limits kind of things, and those hard and fast rules that you set with your children, so that they understand before they even ask the question, what those rules are.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's all done by communication. And that is the overarching theme here, is communication, 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 which I will say, as somebody who, helps parents in their parenting, communication and connection is everything. So many of the problems, air quotes, that you may run into can be solved with the connection and the communication that you have built over the years, over a lifetime with your kids. And that continues on past the teen years and into adulthood. When you have good communication and a strong connection, it's everything. And I know that from people like you, to people that talk about drug and alcohol abuse in kids, to, child sex trafficking, the connection with your parents is the tether that holds you safe. And it's just everything. It's just everything. I can't say it enough.
Absolutely. And it's not, it's never ending. It always needs
it's never ending,
because every year, your children are going to have new teachers, and you need to have new relationships with those teachers and open lines of communication. If they change schools from junior high to high school in those teen years, you need to understand how things worked here may be different than how things work there, and keep yourself involved as much as you can. It's so easy for parents when their teens start becoming more independent. And I'll be perfectly honest, a lot of times parents feel like, okay, I'm ready for the break. We let them go, let them get out there and do their thing. But, and that's great. I understand that. And it is a nice reprieve for a parent to have responsible children who can go out for a few hours with their friends, have a good time. They're going to make it back safe, but at the, when it's all said and done, you have to have that confidence in them. And that confidence just isn't there without the communication piece.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, 100%. Okay, let's quickly touch on teens on the move. You're talking driver safety, parties, and dating. So what is sort of the overarching message here?
Okay, this is where things start getting a little more difficult, because the way I talk about it in the books is, like you got a toddler, a baby, someone that, when they're small, you can set them down and you can walk away for a few minutes and come back and they're right where you left them.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are the good old days.
Yeah. When they start walking around and stuff, you set them down and you turn around for 2 seconds, they're gone, right? Yeah. They're eating out of the dog bowl. It's hard to tell what's going to happen with these kids, right? So it's the same thing in the teen years. When they're pre-driver's license teens, you have a little more control of where they go, how they get there, when they come home, because you're the one moving them back and forth. You or another parent, like I said, that you've already kind of established that relationship with. Now, all of a sudden, they get their driver's license and they're fully mobile. They're like that toddler eating out of the dog bowl. You don't know what they're going to get into.
Yeah.
So, that's where things become a little more complicated for the parent. And that's where the communication piece becomes important. And trust becomes, an incredibly big piece of this whole puzzle. And that trust isn't going to be there without, you being able to have those conversations with them about situational awareness, what it means when it comes to, like we talked about earlier, online safety, school violence, all these different things. These are conversations that need to be had. And, once your teen starts looking for that independence and they start becoming fully mobile on their own, it's, there's a lot of dangers out there, whether it be from driver safety or whether it be for something that they're getting into at a party or whatever. But make sure they know that no matter what they get into, that they have a home base, right? And that's the house. That's where, the safety piece is. And we talked about it earlier. You can work things out with your teens where they can still save face with their friends. Things escalate with teenagers, especially at that driver's age, from 16 to 18 years old. They may go to a party and everything be completely innocent, but things escalate beyond their control rather quickly, and they become uncomfortable with what's happening around them. Yeah. They may have had a drink. They may have smoked. It's hard to tell what could go on, but they need to know that they can contact you. You can get them out of that situation and get them home safely. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a lot of emotional, a lot of emotions going on there.
Yeah, lots.
Put all that aside until things calm down and you can talk about it rationally. Okay, where did things go wrong? How can we do this different next time so that we avoid the situation altogether? And those are difficult conversations to have. We had to have them. You get those 2 o'clock in the morning phone calls like, hey, do you know where your daughter's at right now? And I think I do,
Yeah. Every parent's nightmare, worst nightmare.
Absolutely. So, it's a challenge. It's a challenge for parents and it's a challenge for teenagers. And as parents, we have to keep that in mind. This isn't easy for them either, but if we work together on it, you can give them that confidence and that independence that they need to make good decisions and always get back to you safely. And that's what we're shooting for in this whole thing, because it's about more than just yourself, and it's more than just that parental control. It's about raising independent, thoughtful, intelligent kids who can go out and be productive in the world, and you don't have to worry about them causing more harm than good. At the end of the day, that's what we want from our children.
You are preaching to the choir. I couldn't agree more. And I'll share something with you that my husband will cringe at that I'm sharing about him. But he, in his teens, he left home early, around the age you were in Desert Storm is when he left home. And he could have gone down a really bad path. Didn't go down a great path at first, but then he said to me that he always knew he had that strong foundation at home. He always knew that, his parents would take him back in or, whatever, help him. And his dad actually was in the military as well. They lived in an army base when I first met him. And so, I just want to say, like, from a practical standpoint, and, it's the truth. It really, truly is. It does matter. And you may, as a parent, be in the throes of just thinking, oh my gosh, like, I don't know what I'm doing. I've lost my kid and, all this stuff. And if you have done the work now, all through, as they grow up, you will see that it does matter, that they will see you as a trusting ally, that when you, like you said, make a mistake, they're just there to help you work it out. They're not there to judge you or criticize you. Yes, there's going to be emotions. Yes, all of that stuff. But for you to say, okay, what went wrong? How did this happen? What did you learn from it? What can we do next time you're in this situation? It's so much more impactful to your child, to your teen, than you lecturing them, putting them down, grounding them, taking away all the things that they like and love and their freedom. That doesn't work. But talking to them like they're human and respecting them, that respect begets respect, Sure. So it is vitally important, all of that building the relationship and communication.
Our kids grow up and they see us interacting with other adults and they know what that relationship looks like.
Yeah.
And they start feeling like an adult, whether they are or not, they start feeling like an adult. And that they should be given this responsibility. They want to be communicated with the way they see you communicating with other adults. And that's something that we've always tried to do with our children, is to talk to them like adults. If you ask me a question, I'll give you a blunt answer. I don't care, if you want to hear it or not, I will give you the information that you're asking me for. And I think that they respect that, when it all gets boiled down. And, knowing that you can have that relationship with them and not treat them like a child when they're trying to become an adult goes a long way in that mutual respect piece. And that mutual respect is where the communication locks in as well. So it all kind of ties together, and just treat each other the way you want to be treated. Make sure that everybody understands that you're on the same sheet of music, what those rules are and how they should be applied, and the open communication. I think if you can manage those things with your teen, the relationship is stronger and their safety is pretty much ensured on their end. You can't help what a lot of external forces, may come into play when you're, kids or teenagers, but you can kind of, rest easy in the fact that they know how, when something is bothering them, that they can communicate that to you and you guys can work through it together.
I love everything that you have just said. It makes so much sense. And again, it's so aligned with what I talk about. So of course I love it. It's great. Now, you have a wonderful toolbox item that is going to help so many parents. I really want them to buy your book. And you are giving them a taste of your book by giving them phase 1. Your book is divided into 3 different phases. And so this includes the foreword, the introduction, and phase 1, which includes the parents' guides to teens and situational awareness, navigating the teenage mind, which is so important because we need to understand that actually a lot of behavior that teens do isn't about hormones. It's about the way their mind is changing and growing. And there's a mass reorganization that's happening in the brain as well. So it's really important actually to know that rebellion and risk taking that you talk about is part of the way the mind is working right now. They're seeking that. So then chapter 3 is developing a situational awareness program that teens can live with. I love it. So that's what you have for the parent toolbox. Thank you so much for that. And that's going to be, so that'll be there. And of course, if you aren't a member of the parent toolbox, it's just www.parent-toolbox.com. It's free. And not only will you get his phase 1 of his book, Spotting Danger Before It Spots Your Teen, there are over 100 other amazing parenting resources there for you. Now, before we go, where can we get your book? It's released April 1st. We're talking right now in March, so we're talking sort of in the future. This will be released after the release date itself. So where are people going to be able to find your book, particularly this one, and all of your other books as well?
So you can find these books anywhere books are sold. I've got a website, GaryQuesenberry.com. That's kind of like my hub for everything. Okay. And there's links there for each of the books. There's a link for this 3rd book, Spotting Danger Before It Spots Your Teens, and it'll take you to the pre-order site so that you can pre-order that book. It's released on April the 1st. But I also wanted to let you know that there's a lot more coming out on April the 1st. So along with the paperback books, which are usually what's released first in this series, there's going to be some hardcovers because libraries are getting really interested in these books. I guess, paperbacks don't last a long time in libraries. So there's going to be hardcover books that you can order. There's going to be audiobooks. You mentioned my accent earlier. I read all those myself, so you can hear it all you want. And
I do love it.
Yeah, so there's going to be audiobooks available, the hardcovers. There's also the ebooks for Kindle and things like that. And we're also releasing a video series. So there's going to be a short 20 to 30 minute video that you can download. You can get the physical DVD, all this different stuff. And there'll be a DVD that goes along with each book, so you're getting a little bit of extra information in those that you don't necessarily get in the books. And, it's really growing and it's really expanding fairly quickly. And I couldn't be more proud of it. So I hope that everybody enjoys it.
Well, and look, when I think of building a family, safety is one of the major pillars that we want to have. And so I know you, I trust you, I clearly like you and everything you have to say. And I know that comes through in your work and everything you do. So thank you for all that you're doing to keep us and our kids safe. It's everything. It's everything. Because what are we without being and feeling safe, and if our kids don't feel safe, it shows up as behavior we don't like. Absolutely. And it's just so vital. So Gary, thank you so much. All of this information will be in the show notes, of course, where you can get the book, links, and all of that great stuff. And thank you so much for being here and sharing this with all of our listeners.
It's my pleasure. I always enjoy talking to you. So it's, it's a pleasure to be here. Always.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this edition of my podcast, Parenting Our Future. I'm parent coach Robbin McManne, and if you're enjoying this podcast, please share it with someone who you think might also need to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe, and if you like my work, I would be grateful if you gave me a 5-star rating. For those of you who like my content and want more, visit me at yellingcurebook.com to get your copy of my book and to find other resources to help you. Until next time, I am wishing you and your family peace.